Hey guys, Coach Logan here, this time with a new video series on the elements of chess. In other words, when you look at a position, what are the different factors you consider to get a sense of who's better and what you should be doing. And the first element that I want to cover, which is the one in this video series, is king safety. This is probably the most important one. Different people have different ways they'll assess a position and different factors they'll prioritize, but to me, if your king is not safe, then your position is still complicated. Things could still go wrong, right? I don't care how much material you're up, how much better your pawn structure is. If your king is not safe, something can go wrong. And so the example I wanted to show, the first thing I want to show is something that could happen right out of the opening. So say White plays the move pawn to e4, and Black responds with pawn to e5. So I assume most of you guys have seen this a million times. White's most common move now is to get out a piece, this knight, and threaten this black pawn on e5. Now, Black has a couple of ways to deal with this. They could develop either knight. The most common way is knight to c6 to defend the pawn. They could also play knight f6, which is a move just copying what White's doing. They could play pawn to d6. Maybe not the best move because it blocks in this bishop over here, but it's still a move. So all of those are fine. Now, one thing that Black probably doesn't want to play is the move pawn to f6. Okay? Now, this does look like it defends the pawn, but the problem with this move is it's weakening Black's king, right? So if you notice, there's now a way to attack this king that wasn't available before, which is we could play the move, we could theoretically get a piece to the square h5 over here, which would attack the king from this diagonal. Likewise, it's open up on this diagonal. So for instance, if White were to just play the move bishop c4 here, it's going to be quite hard for Black to castle, right? Because this bishop is taking that away. However, I think White can do even better than that with a really aggressive move here. Now, if White, we'll come back to that in a second, but if White were to just play what I call kind of foofy moves, just kind of soft, non-aggressive moves, Black would get away with this in this position. So like if White played, I don't know, knight to c3, it's not like a terrible move, but say they played something like that. Let's say Black played, I'm just going to give him the move bishop c5 here, and I'm going to give White a few more kind of these, what I call foofy moves, and we'll give Black otherwise decent moves. Let's say they play a bishop to e6, right? Let's say Black were to get a position like this. Here, I don't even really think Black is worse. I think Black has more or less gotten an acceptable position. They could castle kingside, or they could try to lift their queen to d7 and then castle queenside. So that would be fine. The way we take advantage of a position like this is to immediately try to punish Black's king. So after the move f6, I think the strongest move here is to ask yourself that question that Grandmaster Sam Shanklin, who's done a lot of work with ICN the last couple of years, ask yourself that question he always tells you to ask, which is if you have an idea and your opponent tries to stop you, what happens if you just do it anyway? Well, our idea was to play knight takes e5, and they stopped us, but what happens if we actually just take this pawn? Well, okay, so say Black recaptures, which was the point of f6. Now, by moving this knight from f3, we've opened up this queen, which, if you remember earlier, we said wants to come to the square h5. Let's take a look at this. So queen h5 is check, right? What can this king do now? It seems to me that Black only has two ways to deal with the check. They can, remember, if you're in check, you must get out of it. But it's, how can they do that, right? So they can't play a move like knight c6. Watch, the computer won't even let me. I can't move out this knight because I'm in check. So I have to either try to capture, protect, or run away. I don't see any way to capture the queen. So the only options are protect and run away. Well, let's say we try to protect. The only way I see to do that is to use this pawn coming to g6. But the problem here was this queen was not just attacking the king, it was attacking something else. See if you can figure out what that is. Pause your videos if you want more time. But the queen was also moving along the rank to attack this pawn on e5. Take a look at this. We can now take, and once again, this is check. But from e5, we're not just attacking the king, we're actually now attacking something else. Thanks to the fact that black pushed this pawn, we're now also attacking the rook. So it's actually a fork. I'm just going to draw the arrows there. But the queen is attacking both the king and the rook. Okay, so white is just going to end up winning the rook, right? After black, I don't know, blocks or something like that, white just picks up the rook and is doing much, much better. So the other option for black is to move the king, but the only square he can move it, unfortunately, is e7. If he goes to e7, we can continue checking the king by taking stuff. So once again, we can play queen takes e5 check, and once again, black's king has to get out of this, but doesn't have all that many options. They're going to have to play, the only move here is king to f7, but now we can bring out a new piece and bother black's king once more. This is the problem here. White is still down a piece, or at least a piece for 2 pawns, but because black's king is so naked, it just keeps getting embarrassed. It keeps getting attacked by different things. Okay, so how can we bring out a new piece and attack the king? All right, good. We can play bishop to c4 check. All right, this brings in a new it has a new piece join the party, and it's checking the king. And if black doesn't want to immediately give away more material with something like d5, which maybe honestly they should play a move like that, but if they don't want to do that, they'd have to play king g6, and we can still bother this king. How can we check this king again? And this time I want to bring the queen closer to it. Alright, so good. So the queen can actually play queen to f5 check, and once again the king has to move somewhere. Note that the king cannot take the queen because this pawn is defending it. So here the king would have to move to a square like h6, but once again, now we can bring a new piece into the attack with check, right? It's always good when you can bring a piece into the game with check. Well, I shouldn't say it's always good. Sometimes I see kids do that in positions where it doesn't apply. But if you're attacking a king, if you're already on the attack and you've got some pieces, but you can add a new one with check, a lot of times that can be good because it makes your attack more likely to succeed. So how can we do that here? This one's a little bit trickier, but to bring in a new piece, we actually need to move something out of the way. This pawn is in the way of this bishop. If we move it, now we've unleashed this bishop to deliver check on the king. And here black's king is really in a tough spot. He doesn't even really have squares he can move. He can't go to g6 because of our queen. He can't go to h5 because of our queen. He can't go to g5 because of our queen and our bishop. The only moves he could do would be something like pawn to g5. And here, we do not want to take this pawn just yet. Sometimes kids will tell me, oh, you can take the pawn because your bishop is defending, right? Like if you play bishop takes g5, they're like, your queen is defending your bishop, this is check. But unfortunately, black has another piece defending the square. I'll give you a moment to find it. Yeah, this queen could just take you. And yeah, okay, you could take their queen, but there you're just trading queens, and but you did just lose a bishop. White, the computer's pointing out, white could take the bishop, which is better than trading queens at that point, and white's still winning, but we can do even better than this. Here, instead of bishop takes g5, we can try to bring a new piece into the attack. And again, I'd say pause your videos if you want more time, but to me, I think now with this pawn like this, black has given us a hook, and we can try to open up the position for our rook. Hooks open for the rooks. And with that we can play the move h4, And now the idea is we just want to take this pawn and then open up our rook. And I think it's at this point, it's really hard for black to do anything to save his king. This king looks like it's in big trouble. We're threatening to take on g5, both with the bishop and with the pawn. Black is not going to be too happy here. I think this game's going to be over quite quickly. Okay, so again, just going back to the opening, this was really a good example, I think, of how quickly things can go wrong if you or your opponent takes liberties with their king safety. Okay, it's sort of king safety is sort of an element that we, as you get to be a more advanced player, you can take for granted, right? Like what people typically do to make their king safe is they'll castle it, and then they stop thinking about it for a while. But I think it should always factor in your mind, okay? The king, checkmating the king is the goal of the game. And if your opponent's king is not safe, then that can be more important than anything else, okay? Now, one last example I wanted to show with this, just to show just how deeply king safety can matter, and the different types of ways king safety can matter, is this endgame here. I'm just going to switch to a new screen. And in this one, this is a little bit trickier of an example, but basically what's going on here is we're playing black, and white is heading this way down the board. So what white would like to do is try to promote this pawn, right? They're trying to get it down to c7 and c8. But our king is in the way. Our king is sort of playing the guard here. However, white is also threatening to deliver checkmate with his rook. For instance, if black were to fall asleep at the wheel here and just play, I don't know, like rook c8 or something like that, white can now just go check. And with his king and pawn here, my king cannot escape to d7, to c7, or b7. I'd have to block with the rook, but white just takes, and now that's checkmate. So we're in some trouble with that. However, we don't have to do that. Instead, because it looks like a scary position, it looks like white is threatening checkmate, and we don't really want to move our king because then this pawn might promote soon. But what we can use is we can use the fact that white's king itself is not the best protected, and we can deliver a check. There's only one check in the position. See if you can find it. Okay, black can play rook to b1 check, and for the moment, white can't continue with any of his plans, right? I say this with the kids in class, but if you are in check, you must get out of it, right? I make a loud clap so that they remember that. So white can't do rook to g8 checkmate. White will have to move his king somewhere. Let's say they go king to a6. You can just once again deliver check. Okay, and then let's say they come back to b6. Again, you can deliver check. And let's say they don't want to just repeat the position with king a6 because that might be a draw if they keep doing that. Say they go king c5. Guess what you can do again? Check. Guess what you can do again? Check. Guess what you can do again? Check. Okay, and the point here is white's king can never really get shelter, right? They're never able to do any checkmates on you because their king was just always getting hit with checks, right? Now, black is not going to get checkmate here. It's not like black is winning this, but what you're doing is you're using your opponent's lack of king safety to stop them from getting what they want, right? Which shows yet another way that even if you don't have checkmate yourself, just bothering your opponent's king enough can stop them from continuing with their plans. Okay, so I thought these were two examples that show kind of the different ways that king safety can factor into a position, and it's really in my opinion, the most important element of all the elements in chess.